The rain tapped a gentle, uneven rhythm against the window pane, a sound that was usually a comfort. In the small, tidy living room, the only other answer was the soft, hesitant note from the middle C key. An elderly woman sat perfectly still on the piano bench, her finger resting on the ivory. The piano was old, its dark wood scarred with the faint ghosts of ring marks and time. It wasn't a grand instrument, not by a long shot, but in the quiet of the apartment, it was everything. Her name was Estelle, and she was 78 years old. The apartment smelled of lemon polish, chamomile tea, and the faint, musty scent of old paper that clung to the sheet music on the stand. The music was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The pages yellowed at the edges, marked with pencil notations from a lifetime ago. Her hands, resting in her lap now, were a map of her year's veins, like gentle rivers under thin skin, knuckles slightly swollen with arthritis. To look at them, you might think them capable only of knitting or carefully holding a teacup. You would be wrong. Every morning, after her one slice of toast and tea, she would sit here. She didn't play for anyone. Not anymore. The man who used to listen, her husband, was gone 10 years now. He'd liked when she played jazz standards, something upbeat. She'd played for him, tucked that part of herself away, like a favorite dress kept for special occasions that never came. Before him, there had been a different dream. A girl of 17, with fierce eyes and strong, sure fingers, had walked the halls of Juilliard. The name of that school still sent a shiver through her, a phantom pain of a path not taken. Life, as it so often does, had other plans. A pregnancy, a necessary marriage, a move away from the city, and a child who lived only a few heartbreaking hours. The music in her had gone quiet then, a bird with a broken wing. It was only in her later years, in this silence, that it had begun to tentatively sing again, softly, and only for the walls. The phone on the side table rang, sharp and intrusive. Estelle flinched, the spell of the quiet room broken. She knew who it was before she answered. Only one person called her on this line regularly. Grandma? Hi, it's me. It was her granddaughter Chloe. Her voice was bright, too bright, like a light switched on in a dark room. Estelle's face softened immediately. Chloe was the joy of her life, her only grandchild. 24 years old, trying to make her way in the big city, working in television. Hello, my dear. Is everything all right? You sound out of breath. Everything's great. Busy, you know. Always busy at the studio. Chloe's words came in a rush. Listen, I have the most amazing opportunity for you. I've been talking about you at work, about your piano playing. Estelle felt a small, familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Oh, Chloe, no. I've told you. That's just my little hobby. It's not for other people. But that's just it. Chloe's voice climbed with excitement. My boss, he loves that. He runs this show. It's called Spotlight and Shadow. It's all about people with passions, regular people from all walks of life, getting a moment on national TV. It's a tribute, a really lovely tribute to late bloomers, to people who have kept their light under a bushel. Estelle was silent. The words national TV echoed in her head, terrifying and absurd. She looked at her old piano, at her old hands. That's very kind, my love, but I'm not a performer. Not like that. She could hear the smile in Chloe's voice, but now, listening closer, she could hear something else underneath it. A strain, a desperation. Please, Grandma, just think about it. For me, it would mean so much to me. It's really hard to get a spot on this show, and I pulled so many strings because I just know you'd be perfect. It would be such a beautiful thing. And you'd be supporting my career. You always said you wanted to see me succeed? That last part was a low blow, and Chloe knew it. Estelle did want to see her succeed, more than anything. She worried about the girl constantly, alone in that cutthroat city, working all hours. She sent her small checks sometimes, which Chloe always tried to refuse. This felt like a chance to help in a real way, to be more than just a worrywart old woman from afar. What would I have to do? Estelle asked, her voice barely a whisper. Just play. One song, that's all. Just like you do for me when I visit. They'll treat you like a queen, I promise. A car will pick you up. They'll do your hair and makeup. You'll have a beautiful gown. It will be a real day out. Estelle looked around her safe, quiet apartment. The rain had stopped. A beam of weak sunlight fell across the piano keys, making them glow. She thought of Chloe as a little girl, sitting right here on this bench, begging for just one more song, Grandma. She thought of the pride in her voice now. She also thought, with a deep, sinking feeling, of the blinding lights. The sea of unknown faces, the judgment. I'm very old. Chloe, my hands aren't what they were. Your hands are beautiful, Chloe said. And this time her voice cracked, just for a second. Please say yes. I really, really need this. That crack did it. That was the sound of her granddaughter struggling, of her maybe not being okay in that big city. How could she say no? Her own fears seemed small and selfish in the face of that. All right, Estelle said, the word feeling heavy on her tongue. All right, I'll do it. For you. The squeal on the other end of the line was deafening. You will? Oh, Grandma, thank you. You won't regret this, I swear. It's going to be wonderful. I'll email you all the details. I love you so much. I love you too, dear. She hung up the phone. The room was silent again, but the peace was gone. It had been replaced by a low, humming dread. She placed her hands back on the keys, but the chopping wouldn't come. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. All she could think about was the word tribute. It sounded nice. A lovely tribute. She tried to hold on to that dot meanwhile. In a sleek, glass-walled office across the city, Chloe put her head down on her desk. The call had ended. The deal was done. The feeling in her chest wasn't excitement. It was a cold, hard lump of guilt. On her computer screen was the website for Spotlight and Shadow. It wasn't a tribute show. It was a ratings monster built on laughing at people. The host, a handsome, sharp-tongued man named Leo, specialized in coaxing delusional acts onto the stage, and then, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, tearing them apart for the amusement of millions. The segment Chloe had promised her grandmother for was called Golden Year Glee. The subtext was clear. Laugh at the old folks who don't know they have no talent. Her boss, Leo, had given her an ultimatum that afternoon. Bring me a properly hilarious, cringe-worthy contestant for the next taping, or start cleaning out your desk. In a moment of blind panic, she'd thought of her grandmother, of her sweet, Sirius playing in her quiet apartment. She'd painted a beautiful fake picture of the show to Leo, who had grinned and said, "A little old lady who thinks she's a concert pianist? Perfect, deliciously sad. Book her." Chloe felt sick. She had sold out the kindest person she knew to save her own skin. She told herself it would be okay. Maybe they'd go easy on her. Maybe her playing would be so simple and sincere that even Leo's cynicism would be disarmed. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to look, she knew the truth. She had just fed her sweet, trusting grandmother to the wolves, and she was going to have to sit in the audience and watch it happen. She had to, or she'd lose her job. The knot of guilt tightened, making it hard to breathe. She had made her choice. Now, Estelle would have to live with it. The car that came for her was sleek and black, with seats that felt like cold leather. A young man with a polite, empty smile held the door open. Estelle, clutching her small handbag, felt like an impostor being escorted to a palace. She wore her best dress, a simple navy blue one she saved for funerals and very important occasions. It felt scratchy now. The television studio was not a palace. It was a cavernous, warehouse-like place, buzzing with a frantic, confusing energy. Wires snaked across the floor. People in headsets shouted things that sounded like code. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, sweat, and something sweet like hairspray. It was the opposite of her quiet apartment in every single way. A woman with a clipboard, who introduced herself as Tara, whisked her away to a room labeled Green Room. The name was funny, Estelle thought, because the room wasn't green at all. It was a small beige space with a sagging couch, a table of sad-looking pastries, and a mirror framed with bright, harsh light bulbs. A few other people were there. A young man nervously tuned an electric guitar, the sound a tinny screech. A woman in a sparkling leotard stretched her legs in a way that made Estelle's back ache just watching. "Just wait here." "Sweetie," Tara said, her voice cheerful, but her eyes already looking past Estelle to the next thing. "Someone will be in for hair and makeup, then we'll get you mixed up. Your granddaughter said to say hello. She's running around somewhere." Estelle sat on the edge of the couch, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She felt invisible. The young guitarist and the contortionist glanced at her, then at each other, and shared a small, private smile. Estelle saw it. She knew that look. It was the look people gave something they thought was out of place, a curiosity. She was the curiosity. After what felt like an hour, a young man with colorful tattoos covering his arms led her to a makeup chair. He chatted brightly about the weather as he dusted powder on her face, his touch light and professional. "Gonna give you a little something for the cameras," he said, applying a lipstick that felt too waxy. He looked at her hair, which she had set herself that morning in her usual soft, white waves. "We should really tease this up, add some volume," he mused, but Estelle put a gentle hand on his wrist. "No, thank you," she said, her voice firm in a way that surprised her. "I'd like to keep it as it is." He shrugged, a "your funeral" look in his eyes, and moved on. Back in the green room, she was fitted with a small microphone pack that they clipped to the back of her dress. It felt heavy and strange. Just as they finished, the door opened and her granddaughter rushed in. Chloe looked different. She wore a stylish black blazer and trousers, and her face was painted with a professional-looking makeup that made her seem older, sharper. But her eyes, when she found Estelle's, were the same. They were also wide, with a nervous energy Estelle had never seen before. "Grandma, you look beautiful," Chloe said, bending to give her a quick hug. She smelled of perfume and stress. "Thank you, dear. This is all very big, isn't it? It's so exciting." Chloe's smile was too wide. "Listen, they're going to bring you out in a few minutes for a quick pre-interview with the host. His name is Leo. He's wonderful, very charming. He'll just ask you a few easy questions, okay? Just be yourself." Before Estelle could ask what questions, a man with a headset popped his head in. "We're ready for Mrs. Vance in pre-rec." Chloe squeezed her hand. Her palm was damp. "You'll be great. Just remember, it's a tribute, a celebration." Estelle was led not to the main stage, but to a smaller, darker set designed to look like a cozy library. A handsome man in a perfectly fitted suit was waiting, sipping from a water bottle. He had a famous face, one Estelle vaguely recognized from channel surfing. This was Leo, the host. His smile was instant and brilliant, but it didn't seem to warm his blue eyes. "Ah, our pianist of the hour," he said, his voice a smooth, radio-ready baritone. He took her hand, not so much shaking it as just holding it for a moment. "Estelle, is it? A lovely name. I'm so thrilled you're with us. Thank you for having me, Estelle said quietly, sitting in the chair he gestured to. A light above them clicked on, hot and blinding. So, Leo began, leaning forward as if they were sharing a secret. The camera in front of them had a small red light that was now on. Tell me, Estelle, what brings a lovely woman like you, who should be enjoying a quiet retirement, to a stage like Spotlight and Shadow? Estelle thought of Chloe's words. Well, it's a tribute, isn't it? To late bloomers. My granddaughter thought it would be a nice opportunity. Leo's smile tightened just at the corners. A tribute, yes. And what do you hope the audience takes away from your performance today? I just hope they feel the music, Estelle said, feeling foolish. It's a Chopin ballade. It's very emotional. Chopin, Leo said, turning to the camera with a raised eyebrow. Ambitious. And how long have you been playing piano, my dear? Since I was a child. I studied for a time, long ago. Then life got in the way. She looked down at her hands in her lap. I've only recently returned to it seriously. So you're making up for lost time, Leo said, his tone suggesting this was a quaint, slightly sad idea. And what did your family say when you told them you'd be performing on national television? Were they supportive? Or did they think Grandma had lost a few marbles? He gave a warm, chuckling sound, inviting her to laugh along. Estelle didn't laugh. She felt a prickle of discomfort. My granddaughter is very supportive. She works here. Isn't that sweet? Leo said, the words somehow feeling hollow. Well, we are all so eager to hear you play. I'm sure it will be memorable. He turned fully to the camera, his face shifting into a more serious, yet still smirking, expression. You heard it here, folks. Estelle is here to make up for lost time with a little Chopin. Don't go away. The red light on the camera went off. Leo's brilliant smile vanished, as if switched by a dial. He stood up, not looking at her, and handed his water bottle to a production assistant. All right, let's get her to the holding area for the live segment, he said to no one in particular, already walking away. Estelle was led back through the maze of corridors, her mind whirling. The interview hadn't felt like a tribute. It had felt like an inspection. Backstage near the main stage, the noise was overwhelming. She could hear the thunderous sound of the live audience laughing and clapping. The contortionist was on stage now, and the host's amplified voice was making jokes about pretzels. The laughter that followed was loud and cruel. Chloe appeared beside her, looking pale. You did great in the pre-interview, she said, but her voice was thin. Before Estelle could respond, a young woman with a headset handed Chloe a tablet. Final captions for approval for the Golden Year Glee segment. Leo wants the cat walking on peas, one for sure. Chloe stared at the screen, her face going from pale to a sickly gray. Estelle, curious, glanced over her granddaughter's shoulder. On the screen were phrases that would appear on the screen during her performance. Asterisk, is that a piano? Or a snooze button? Her fingers remember the 19th century. Too bad the tune didn't come along. Asterisk, catwalking the keys, the feline approach to Chopin. Estelle's heart stopped. The air left her lungs. She looked from the horrible words on the screen to her granddaughter's horrified, guilty face. The truth, ugly and complete, crashed down on her all at once. This was no tribute. She was the joke. They had brought her here to laugh at her. And Chloe had known. Chloe? Estelle's voice was a whisper, shattered. Chloe's eyes filled with frantic tears. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't have a choice. I'll fix it. I'll tell them to stop. But it was too late. The contortionist was leaving the stage to a mix of boos and mocking applause. Leo's voice boomed, full of false warmth. And now, for a truly special treat. Let's welcome our next performer, all the way from her cozy living room. Please give a warm spotlight and shadow welcome to Estelle." The stage manager pointed at her. "Go, go now." Chloe looked at her, utterly broken. Estelle looked back. In her granddaughter's face, she saw the scared little girl she used to comfort, the young woman she loved more than anything. The betrayal was a physical pain, but beneath it, a strange, cold calm began to settle over her. She turned away from Chloe, from the cruel captions on the tablet, from the laughing audience she could hear. She walked towards the bright archway that led to the stage. Her back, which had ached all day, straightened. Her hands, which had felt stiff and old, curled gently at her sides. They weren't leading a tribute. They were leading a lamb to slaughter. But as she stepped into the blinding wall of light and heard the patronizing, scattered applause, a fire she had not felt in 60 years flickered to life deep in her chest. It wasn't anger. It was something clearer. It was defiance. The light was a solid thing. It wasn't bright. It was a white, hot wall that erased everything beyond the edge of the stage. Estelle stood frozen for a second, blinded. The sound of the applause was thin, polite, and it stopped quickly, like people were unsure why they were clapping. It was replaced by a low murmur of conversation, the rustle of programs, the sound of an audience settling in for what they expected to be a comedy break. She could just make out the shape of the grand piano, a huge, black, glossy beast in the center of the stage. It looked nothing like her humble upright at home. It looked like a predator. A young woman in a headset gently took her elbow and guided her forward. Each step on the smooth floor felt unsteady. The host, Leo, was waiting by the piano, his smile a perfect white slash in the blinding light. "And here she is, folks." His voice boomed, too loud, too cheerful. "Our very own Estelle, ready to take us on a musical journey. Tell me, my dear, are you excited? Nervous?" He held the microphone toward her. Estelle looked at it, then past it, trying to find a single friendly face in the dark void beyond the lights. She couldn't see anyone. It was just a sea of shadow. She thought of Chloe, somewhere in that darkness, and a fresh wave of betrayal washed over her, cold and sickening. "I am here to play," she said, her voice quiet. The microphone didn't seem to pick it up properly. A few people in the audience giggled. "She's here to play." Leo repeated with a chuckle, playing to the crowd. "Well, we are all ears. Or perhaps we should brace ourselves. You've chosen quite a piece, I understand. Something by Chopin?" "Ballade number 1, Estelle said, a little stronger this time. "A ballade." Leo turned to the audience with a wide-eyed, mock-impressed expression. "That sounds serious and long. Well, we've got all the time in the world, don't we, everyone?" The question was met with a few scattered, unsure laughs. He was setting her up, and everyone knew it. "The stage is yours, Estelle. Don't be shy." He gave a small, exaggerated bow and walked off to the side, leaving her alone in the vastness of the stage. The murmur from the audience grew slightly. She could feel their gaze, a physical pressure. They were waiting for her to be old. They were waiting for her to fumble, to play something simple and sad and badly. They were waiting for the joke dot. She walked the last few steps to the piano. The bench was adjusted too high. She had to pause and awkwardly turn the knobs underneath to lower it, a sound grating in the quiet. Someone in the audience coughed. The silence was becoming uncomfortable, prickly with anticipation. Finally, she sat. The smooth, cool ivory of the keys felt alien under her fingertips. At home, her keys had a slight give, a familiar wear. These were hard and perfect. She placed her hands in her lap, closing her eyes for just a second. She didn't see the audience. She didn't see the cameras. She saw the captions on her granddaughter's tablet, catwalking the keys. Her hands, when she lifted them, were trembling. She laid her fingers on the starting notes. Her right hand, with its stiff knuckles, looked frail under the lights. She took a slow, deep breath that shuddered on the way in. The first notes came out soft, tentative. A simple, questioning melody. It was quiet, almost too quiet. It was exactly what the audience expected. A sweet, forgettable little tune from a sweet, forgettable old woman. On the giant screens flanking the stage, a caption flashed, bright and mocking. Asterisk, pianissimo. Or just plain quiet? A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Leo, standing in the wings, smiled and nodded to himself. It was going perfectly. Estelle heard the laugh. It cut through the music like a knife. And something inside her, something that had been bent and folded and put away for decades, finally snapped. It was not anger. It was a release. Her eyes, which had been downcast, opened. They fixed on a point somewhere in the distance, far beyond this studio, this humiliation. The timid expression on her face melted away, replaced by a look of deep, profound focus. Her spine, which had been curled, straightened. Her shoulders went back. The music changed. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was like a dam breaking. The gentle, questioning melody erupted. The left hand crashed in with a powerful, rolling wave of deep, resonant chords that vibrated through the floor and into the chests of the people in the front row. The right hand, those same frail-looking fingers, became a blur of impossible motion, flying across the keys in a cascade of notes that was fierce, precise, and heartbreakingly beautiful. The playful, mocking caption on the screen suddenly seemed stupid, grotesquely out of place. It vanished, replaced by nothing. The audience's nervous laughter died in their throats. A man who had been checking his phone looked up, his mouth slightly open. A woman who had been whispering to her friend stopped mid-sentence. Estelle was gone. The elderly woman in the simple dress had disappeared. In her place was a musician, an artist of immense power and passion. Her body moved with the music, not in a big theatrical way, but with a natural rhythm, a slight lean into a passionate phrase, a sharp nod of her head at a staccato passage. Her face was a landscape of emotion. You could see the sorrow in the deep, melancholic sections, a private grief etched in the lines around her eyes. You could see the defiant joy in the fiery, technically monstrous runs, her jaw set with a strength that belied her years. The ballade was a story. It was a story of turmoil, of longing, of a fierce battle and a tender lament. And she was telling it with every fiber of her being. The piano was no longer a predator. It was an extension of her. She commanded it. The soft parts were so delicate they made the air seem to hold its breath. The loud parts were thunderous, a tempest of sound that filled the vast studio, shaking the very lights. Backstage, the young guitarist who had smiled at her earlier stood frozen, his instrument hanging forgotten at his side. The contortionist had stopped stretching and was just staring at the monitor, her face blank with shock. In the control room, producers and directors were in chaos, but a silent chaos. They pointed at the audio levels, which were peaking perfectly. They looked at each other, eyes wide. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't a joke. This was real, but the real earthquake was in the audience. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a creeping, then overwhelming awe. People stopped fidgeting. They stopped thinking about what they would have for dinner. They were pulled into the music, into the story this woman was weaving. An elderly man in the third row, who had come for a laugh, felt an unexpected sting of tears in his eyes. He didn't know why. He just felt it. Chloe, standing in the dark at the side of the stage, had her hands pressed over her mouth. She wasn't seeing her grandmother anymore. She was seeing a stranger, a formidable, majestic stranger who had been hiding in plain sight all her life. The guilt was still there, a hot, choking weight, but it was now mixed with a staggering, humbling pride. She had meant to display a trinket and had instead uncorked a hurricane. On stage, Estelle approached the final, breathtaking minutes of the piece. The music built and built, a furious, a passionate climb toward a climax. Her hands were a storm over the keys. Sweat glistened at her temples. And then, with a series of crashing, definitive chords, it ended. The final note hung in the air, a deep, resonant G minor that slowly faded into absolute silence. She lifted her hands from the keyboard and placed them back in her lap, in the same position they had started. She was breathing heavily. She was just an old woman on a piano bench again. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence was total, thicker than before. The audience was stunned, physically unable to react. They had been psychologically prepared for a chuckle, not for a journey that had scraped their souls. Then, from the middle of the darkness, one person began to clap. It was a single, solid, slow clap. Then another person joined. And another. It wasn't wild applause. It was a rising wave of recognition, of respect. It built from a ripple into a roar. People surged to their feet. Not because they were told to, but because they had to. The sound that filled the studio now was thunderous, deafening, real. It was a standing ovation. Estelle, still sitting at the piano, blinked slowly. She looked out at the sea of standing, shearing shadows. She heard the sound, but it felt distant. She felt very, very tired. And for the first time since she was a girl, standing backstage at a Juilliard recital, she felt something else, too. She felt seen. The applause was a physical thing. It hit the stage like a warm, rolling wave, washing over her. Estelle sat very still on the piano bench, her hands folded in the navy blue fabric of her dress. She was breathing hard, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. The bright lights that had felt so hostile before now seemed to hold her in a kind of cradle. She could see nothing beyond them, just a dark, roaring sea of sound. Backstage, it was chaos, but a silent, stunned chaos. People in headsets were frozen, looking at each other, then at the monitors showing the audience on their feet. The show's script, the jokes, the planned roasting segment, it was all just paper now, worthless. The young woman who had handed Chloe the tablet earlier whispered, "What do we do?" No one had an answer. Leo, the host, stood in the wings opposite Chloe. His brilliant, automatic smile was gone. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He watched the old woman on the stage, the audience screaming for her, and he looked like a man who had opened a jewelry box expecting plastic and found a live grenade. He clutched his cue cards for the next segment, but his knuckles were white. This wasn't in the cards. He had a show to run. He had to regain control. Taking a deep breath, he forced the professional mask back onto his face, though it didn't fit as well as before. He strode out onto the stage, holding up his hands as if trying to gently calm the storm out the audience. Seeing him, began to slowly settle back into their seats. But the energy was still electric, buzzing in the air. Leo walked over to Estelle, who was still sitting at the piano. He reached out a hand to help her up. She looked at it for a moment, then placed her own hand in his and rose to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady. "My goodness," Leo said into his microphone, his voice lacking its usual slick confidence. It sounded almost ordinary. "Estelle, that was something." He led her to the 2 chairs positioned at center stage for the true interview portion, the part that was supposed to be the comedic roast. They sat down. The audience was utterly silent, leaning forward. They could feel the shift. They knew something had broken. So, Leo began. glancing at his cards and then tossing them aside on the floor with a small, dismissive flick. A tiny, real gesture the audience caught. "I think it's safe to say you surprised a few people here tonight." Estelle nodded. She was looking at her hands again, now resting in her lap. They were trembling slightly from the exertion. "I suppose I did," she said quietly. "You studied?" He asked. The question was genuine now, stripped of the mocking tone from before. A long time ago. At Juilliard. The name dropped into the quiet studio like a stone in a pond. A collective gasp, then a murmur, rippled through the audience. Juilliard. Leo's eyebrows shot up. This piece of information changed everything. It transformed the story from a quirky, lucky performance into something else, a tragedy of talent postponed, a secret history. Juilliard, he repeated slowly. And life got in the way? Estelle finally looked up, not at him, but out toward the dark shapes of the audience. Yes, life often does. There was a marriage, a child who passed, responsibilities. Each word was simple, heavy, and true. There was no self-pity in her voice. It was just fact. The piano became a private thing. For a very long time. In the darkness, dozens of people felt a pang in their chests. They thought of their own abandoned dreams, their own quiet compromises. Leo opened his mouth, probably to ask another polite, probing question. But he never got the chance. From the side of the stage, a man walked out. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was one of the show's guest judges, a famous classical conductor, known for his sharp, often brutal critiques. He was an older man with a stern face and a reputation for having no patience for mediocrity. He walked with purpose, ignoring the stunned stage manager waving frantically from the wings. He didn't have a microphone. He simply walked right up to Estelle's chair and stood before her. The audience held its breath. Was this part of the show? Was he going to tear her apart anyway? He looked down at her. Then, to everyone's shock, he did something no one had ever seen him do on television before. He bent at the waist in a slow, deep, and unmistakable bow of respect dot when he straightened. His stern face was softened with emotion. He turned to Leo and, without asking, took the host's microphone from his limp hand. He turned to face the audience, his voice low but clear, trembling with a feeling he usually kept locked away. "Forgive this interruption," he said. "But I must." He turned back to Estelle. "Madam, what we just witnessed, that was not a performance for a television show." His voice grew stronger, filling the silent studio. "That was not a party trick. That was a lifetime. That was a confession played in notes instead of words. I have heard that ballade played by the greats in concert halls around the world. I have never heard it played with such personal truth." He paused, swallowing hard. "You made me feel the loss. You made me feel the silence of those years. And then you made me hear the defiance. That is art. The rest of this," he waved a dismissive hand around at the flashy set, "is noise." He handed the microphone back to a speechless Leo and walked off the stage, disappearing into the wings. The silence he left behind was profound. Holy dot, it was the death knell for the show's planned narrative. Leo was a professional, but even he couldn't spin this. The conductor's words had given the audience permission to feel what they were already feeling, and had given them the language for it. This wasn't just a cute old lady who played well. This was an artist they had tried to mock. Leo looked at Estelle, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw the fatigue, the dignity, the quiet shock in her eyes. He saw a human being, not a punchline. "It seems," he said, his voice hushed, "the smarm completely gone, that you have given us all a lesson tonight. Thank you, Estelle." That was it. There were no more jokes. There was no roast. The segment was over. A stage manager, recovering, gestured frantically, and the show cut to a sudden, jarring commercial break. The lights on stage dimmed slightly. Leo stood up, offered his hand to Estelle again, and helped her up. "Are you all right?" he asked, quietly, just to her. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As he led her off the stage, the audience, seeing her leave, erupted into applause once more. This time, it followed her into the wings, a soundtrack to her exit. Backstage was now a flurry of quiet, urgent activity. Producers were huddled, talking in low, serious voices. The young woman with the tablet was nowhere to be seen. But Estelle saw only one person. Chloe was standing against a dark wall, her face streaked with tears. She looked utterly shattered. When she saw her grandmother, she took a step forward, then stopped, as if she didn't have the right to approach. Estelle stopped walking. Leo, sensing the moment, gave her a small nod and melted away into the chaos. For a long moment, the two women just looked at each other amidst the buzzing alien world of the studio. The noise of the audience was a dull roar. The air smelled of dust and electronics. "Grandma?" Chloe choked out. The word a sob. Estelle looked at her granddaughter, the clever, ambitious girl she loved, who had been so scared that she had done this terrible, hurtful thing. She saw the guilt, the shame, the fear, and she saw the little girl who used to beg for songs. The anger was there, a cold, hard stone in her stomach. The betrayal was deep, but stronger than that was a lifetime of love and the staggering exhaustion of the last hour. She didn't open her arms. She didn't smile. She simply looked at Chloe, her own eyes full of a pain that was too old and too deep for fresh tears. "Take me home, Chloe," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but absolutely clear. "Just take me home." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a resolution. It was a necessity. She needed to be away from these lights, these strangers, this place where her most private self had been turned into a public spectacle before being unexpectedly sanctified. She needed the quiet of her own apartment, the familiar feel of her own piano keys, a view of the rain on her window. Chloe, hearing the command, nodded frantically, wiping her face with the back of her hand. She stepped forward, not to hug, but to gently take her grandmother's elbow, to guide her. It was an act of service, of penance. Together, the elderly woman in the simple dress and the young woman in the stylish blazer walked away from the blinding stage, down a dim corridor, towards an exit sign. One of them had just shattered a television show. The other had just shattered her own heart. And the echoes of the music, of the truth that had been played, followed them out into the night. The car ride home was silent. It was a different kind of quiet than the one in Estelle's apartment. This quiet was thick and heavy, filled with things that couldn't be said. Chloe drove, her eyes fixed on the wet streets reflecting the city lights. Her hands were tight on the steering wheel. Every few minutes, she would open her mouth as if to speak, but only a shaky breath would come out. Estelle sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window. She felt hollowed out, like a shell. The tremendous energy that had poured out of her on that stage was gone, leaving behind a deep, bone-aching weariness. The applause still rang in her ears, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. All she really felt was the cold, hard knot of her granddaughter's betrayal. Sitting right beside her in the car, they reached the familiar old building. Chloe hurried to open her grandmother's door, then the building's main door, a series of small, frantic gestures of care. Up in the apartment, the lemon polish and chamomile smell welcomed Estelle back. It felt like a haven, but a haven that had been violated. The truth of what had almost happened had followed her in. "Can I make you some tea?" Chloe asked, her voice small in the familiar space. "No, thank you," Estelle said. She walked over to her piano, but didn't sit. She just rested her fingertips on its closed lid. "Grandma, Chloe's words tumbled out in a rush. "I am so sorry. You have no idea. I was so scared. My job, they were going to fire me, and he said I needed a good contestant, and I thought maybe it would be okay. Maybe they'd be nice. But I knew they wouldn't, and I did it anyway. I'm a horrible person." She slid down the wall onto the floor, hugging her knees, finally crumbling completely. Estelle watched her. She saw not a malicious stranger, but a terrified young woman who had made a terrible, cowardly choice. The anger was still there, but it was beginning to thaw around the edges, softened by a lifetime of love and by the simple, utter exhaustion of the night. "You are not a horrible person," Estelle said, her voice tired but firm. "You were scared, and you were weak. And you used me. That is a hard thing to forget." Chloe sobbed into her knees. The sound was raw and ugly in the quiet room. "But," Estelle continued, turning to look at the old photograph of a younger herself on the mantel, "you also brought me to that piano. And for the first time in 60 years, I played for someone other than these walls. Not the way you intended, but I played." She finally sat on the piano bench, her back to Chloe. She didn't open the lid. "Now I am very tired. I would like you to go home. We will talk tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a ceasefire. Chloe understood. She pulled herself up, her face swollen and red. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Grandma, I'll call you tomorrow." The door clicked shut behind her. The apartment was silent again, truly silent. Estelle sat there for a long time, until the city outside her window grew quiet to God ******. The world, however, did not stay quiet. The next morning, Chloe called, her voice hushed with awe. "Grandma, you have to turn on your computer, or the news. It's everywhere." A neighbor knocked on the door later, holding out a phone with a video playing. It was her. The clip was titled, "The 78-year-old Who Shut Down a TV Show with Chopin." It had millions of views. People had edited it, setting her performance to black and white, slowing parts down. The cruel captions were nowhere to be seen. Instead, people had added her biography, the story of Juilliard, of a life interrupted. The conductor's speech was its own viral clip. That is art. The rest is noise. Newspapers and television shows picked up the story. They weren't interested in the show's format anymore. They were interested in her. They called it a reckoning for cheap, mean-spirited television. The network that aired Spotlight and Shadow issued a formal apology for the misrepresentation of her segment. Leo, the host, gave a surprisingly humble interview saying the experience had been profoundly humbling. Offers began to arrive. Not fan mail, but real offers. A famous symphony orchestra invited her to be a guest performer for a single night. A prestigious music school asked if she would consider giving a masterclass. A publisher wanted to talk about a memoir. Chloe, who had quit her job at the show the morning after, became the gatekeeper. She brought the letters and emails to her grandmother's apartment, laying them out on the kitchen table like a strange new hand of cards. "You don't have to do any of it," Chloe said every time. She was different now, quieter. The sharp, ambitious edge was blunted by guilt and a new, fierce desire to protect. Estelle would look at the offers, then out the window. She was 78. She liked her quiet. She liked her routine. The thought of a concert hall, of cameras, of students, made her feel tired. But then, one afternoon, she opened her piano lid. She played a simple scale, and she thought about the conductor's words. Asterisk, you made me feel the silence of those years. Asterisk, she had lived in that silence for so long. It was comfortable. But now that it had been heard, truly heard by thousands, Maybe she didn't need to be so quiet anymore. Weeks later, she agreed to two things. First, to the single night with the symphony. It was terrifying and magnificent. She played the same ballade, this time accompanied by a full orchestra that swelled around her like a powerful ocean. The audience gave her another standing ovation, but this one felt different. It was expected, respectful. It was nice, but it didn't touch her soul the way the shocked, tearful silence in that TV studio had. The second thing she agreed to was the masterclass. But not at the big, prestigious school. At a small, underfunded community music center in the city. The kind of place that gave lessons to children whose families couldn't afford much. The room was bright, filled with the nervous energy of a dozen young students and their parents. The piano was old and slightly out of tune. It reminded her of her own. She didn't lecture. She listened. A 15-year-old girl played a difficult sonata, her technique impressive but brittle, all flashy speed and no heart. The girl finished, looking proud and defensive, waiting for praise. Estelle was quiet for a moment. "You play the notes perfectly," she said. "Now, why are you angry at the piano?" The girl blinked, startled. "I'm not angry." "You are," Estelle said gently. "You are hitting it. You are telling it who is boss. But music is not a fight. It is a conversation. What is this part here?" She pointed to a lyrical passage, "trying to tell you? It is not about being fast. It is about being sad or lonely, or remembering something sweet. Play it like you are telling me a secret." Hesitantly, the girl played again, slower, listening. The notes softened, connected. A phrase breathed. When she finished, the girl looked up, her eyes wide. "It feels different," she whispered. "It is different," Estelle said. A small, real smile touched her lips. "You are not just a player now. You are a storyteller." She worked with each student like that. Not on technique, but on feeling, on listening, on the story. She talked about life getting in the way. She talked about playing for joy, even in an empty room. The children and their parents listened, rapt. This was not a famous maestro. This was a grandmother who knew things. Afterward, as the students filed out, the young girl from the fore hung back. "Miss Estelle?" she said. "Do you think? Is it too late? If you stop for a while, can you ever get it back?" Estelle looked at the girl's anxious face. She thought of her own silent decades, of the dust that had settled on her sheet music. She put a hand on the girl's shoulder. "The music waits," she said. "It is very patient. It lives right here." She touched her own chest. "Even when you are not listening, it is waiting for you to come back. It is never too late to listen again." The girl hugged her, a quick, tight squeeze, and ran off to her mother. Chloe, who had been watching from the back of the room, drove her grandmother home. The afternoon sun was warm through the car windows. "You were amazing in there," Chloe said softly. "It was a good day," Estelle said. She felt useful. She felt peaceful. That evening, back in her apartment, she did not play Chopin. She played an old jazz standard, something her husband had liked. It was light and swingy. She played it just for the pleasure of the sound. The phone rang. It was a reporter, asking for one more comment, wanting to call her an inspiration. Estelle listened politely. "Thank you," she said. "But the inspiration was already here. I just—" finally opened the window. She hung up and went back to her piano. The night was quiet. The city hummed outside. She played for no one and for everyone, for the past and for the now, her hands moving easily over the keys, no longer a secret, but finally simply a song.